About 8 months ago, I had the privilege of attending the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly in Columbus, Ohio. And I was excited about this one. As a religious studies major, I knew how seemingly intractable the issue of Israel-Palestine was. And the resolution was up for debate: whether the UUA should divest from companies that profit from the human rights abuses suffered by the Palestinian people. Now, a month after this assembly, I'd be traveling to Israel with a peace delegation to get a better understanding of the conflict. So I was very eager to see how a progressive, spiritually diverse community talked about such a hot-button issue. The resolution argued that the State of Israel had been illegally occupying and colonizing Palestinian land for almost 50 years. They'd been using certain companies to systematically oppress the native population, and it was time for us to publicly divest. And as a peace-loving liberal community, we'd have no problem discussing this, right? Well, the controversy started immediately. At the opening ceremony, a prominent rabbi took the stage to denounce the resolution, urging all us delegates to vote no. In what was supposed to be a welcoming speech to the assembly, he claimed that the divestment movement was a slap in the face to American Jews. The tension in the room was palpable. Later that week, a panel of religiously diverse UUs discussed their personal backgrounds, and we couldn't just let them speak. They had to fend off applauding and booing. And to top it off, at the end of the week, the UUA announced that they had quietly removed their investments anyway. So one side said they hadn't gone far enough, that they hadn't publicly divested to make a political statement. And the other side felt cheated, as if they hadn't gotten a vote, as if the unilateral move was anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-democratic. So the resolution was altered. Instead of voting to divest, we would now be voting on whether or not to commend the UUA for already removing its investments. Just pretty weak in comparison, right? So debate began, finally, and was immediately halted by a motion to postpone the vote indefinitely. That failed, but then the next motion argued that the resolution was not a business resolution, as defined by the UUA, so it should not be voted on. And most of the remaining 2 hours was spent debating amendments. Explicitly recognize the State of Israel as legitimate, or take out the word Palestinians. The rhetoric was sour and angry. Accusations of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, and willful ignorance were hurled. And I witnessed my fellow delegates, hundreds of them, yelling at each other, at the speakers, at the moderator. Almost nobody got a chance to debate the actual resolution before it was time to vote. So much time had been spent bickering over details. Almost no discussion had taken place. It got so bad, the moderator had to call a minister up to the stage to deliver a soothing meditation. The final score? 55% voted for divesting, 45% against. But to be adopted, it needed 2/3 of the vote. So despite a majority in favor, the resolution failed. And neither side was exactly happy about that outcome. And my illusions about the peace-loving, progressive community getting together for insightful dialogue were shattered. This wasn't supposed to happen to us. So it was with confusion and frustration in my heart that a month later, I flew to Israel. My advisor had told me about an opportunity to travel with a group called Interfaith Peace Builders to talk to organizations and understand the situation on the ground. There were a lot of reasons I wanted to go, but I think that I expected that through dialogue and debate, some solution would present itself. One state, two state, whatever, that there would be some golden political fix, some quick policy change that I could advocate for back home. I ended up coming back even less sure that the problem had a solution. I knew a few things going in. They gave us a reading packet. I knew that Israel was created in 1948, occupied the Palestinian territories in 1967, and that the area had undergone a series of confused peace deals since then. I knew that both sides were prone to using violence to get their way, and that there was no clear consensus on the best way to stop it. But mostly what I learned from my reading was what I'd already experienced at General Assembly. An issue that is rooted deep in religion, culture, class, politics, history, and identity will inevitably become divisive. There was a kind of recurring theme for the next 2 weeks. Misrepresentation, lack of understanding, lack of empathy, and point of view. Both sides, I discovered, had constructed a reality of the situation that didn't consider the other side's reality. Arguments about Israel and Palestine tend to be fought using the terms Jewish and Muslim, or Jews and Arabs. Taking a side on the matter means, in the eyes of some, adopting anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or racism. If you bring up the legitimate need of the Jewish community for a secure homeland in the wake of atrocities, you might be accused of supporting genocide and oppression. If you express sympathy for Palestinians undergoing occupation and apartheid, says the other side, you must be okay with the Holocaust or deny it altogether. There are a lot of lenses through which to view conflict. In the Holy Land, almost all of them apply in some form or another. But very quickly on, I saw how this knee-jerk, jump-to-conclusions style of labeling opinions would only make the argument worse. Before we left from Washington, the organizers ran us through what to do if we were denied entry to the State of Israel. We flew on 5 different flights, and each one had one person detained at the airport in Tel Aviv, interrogated, and sent back home. 5 people were denied entry and told that they were threats to national security. Each of them was Muslim, except for Owen. Owen was a teacher from New York who had a long black beard, and the guard who questioned him was not subtle about his reservations. Are you a Muslim who changed your name to be American? Or did you recently turn Muslim and haven't changed your name yet? Well, they were all jailed for several hours before being sent back home. Owen said later, "I've never been to a place where profiling seems so celebrated." So already I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone. Right? Well, the rest of us made it to our hotel in East Jerusalem. The drive was pretty nice, actually very reminiscent of New Mexico. Dry hills teeming with bits of brush, small desert communities peppering the road every so often, a 26-foot-high concrete wall. I mean, we don't have that yet, but you get the idea. Over the next 2 weeks, we'd be staying mostly in the West Bank, the occupied Palestinian territory that's sandwiched between Israel and Jordan. We met with a lot of groups in the next few days. The first week was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. We traveled to Bethlehem first to meet with some peacemakers. I prayed in the Church of the Nativity. I learned that 2/3 of Palestinians are considered forcibly displaced under international law. I observed powerful art and poetry painted on the border wall. I discussed with a Christian organizer how anti-Semitism slowly seeps into public discourse, how a people under oppression can conflate politics with religion and falsely condemn Judaism for the actions of the Israeli government. In Jerusalem, I went to the Wailing Wall and to Golgotha, praying, learning, and observing. I also visited a shop in the Old City that sold trinkets with "Free Palestine" and "End the Occupation" stamped on them, standing poignantly under a proudly waving Israeli flag. So at first, I tried to split my experience into 2. One is a pilgrim to the Holy Land, paying tribute to the matriarchs and patriarchs of Western religion, and the other as a witness to the conflict, noting violence and oppression in the modern day. But as time went on, the more I listened and read and observed, the more the conflict took the spotlight, the more the holy sites seemed like a distraction from reality. The more disillusioned with the peace process I became, the less I knew about right and wrong. I fell victim to the same jaded, knee-jerk anger that I saw at General Assembly. I listened to an Israeli woman tell me the story of the rage she experienced at a mosque in Beersheba, where she had been condemned for her race and her religion. So she moved to a settlement, taking advantage of the government benefits, and lived in fear of leaving that settlement, an oasis in a desert of hatred, she told me. That was her reality. But I saw a different reality in a popular shisha lounge in the refugee camp, Dheisheh, where I met two young men named Omar and Saeed. Saeed had just returned from Italy. About a year prior, his younger brother had been shot in the knee by an Israeli soldier. The medical treatment in Israel did more harm than good, so through a series of covert donations, secret messages, and miracles, they managed to fly him to Europe, where he spent 5 months recovering. I have no hatred toward anybody, Saeed told me. I only want to return to the home of my family. Jewish neighbors, fine by me. I want out of this camp. He, too, felt trapped in his community. I talked to an Israeli cab driver in Jerusalem who warned me about the hotel I was staying in. Everybody I talk to who stays in your hotel is disappointed, he says. The food, the beds, the service, it does not represent Israel. It does not represent Jerusalem. He seemed to think that the west side of Jerusalem, the Israeli side, had their act together a little bit better. That's where most tourists go, he says. He very much wanted me to get a picture of his Israel, his reality. He truly cared that I left with a good impression. Later on, we went to Nabi Saleh, a small town in the West Bank widely known for its activism. The Tamimi family runs the place and hosted our overnight stay. The village stands across the valley from an Israeli settlement. Nawal Tamimi took us on a hike to the hill overlooking the settlement and pointed to a long white building with a red roof. You see that? She says, that's a swimming pool. There are times we go without running water for 4 or 5 days at a time, and we can hear the kids splashing around in that swimming pool. Different realities. Near the end of my time in Palestine, I posted a few of these stories on Facebook. And I got a few negative, argumentative responses in my inbox. One person in particular, a friend of a friend who lives in Israel, made a lot of assumptions from the stories I told. She opened her message like this: when you have a narrative already in place, you will always find and see things that continue to support that narrative. Fair enough. She followed that with this question: since the only place in your narrative for Israel is as an evil, aggressive occupier, what do you suggest happens to the Jews who live here? Should we be murdered, exiled, destroyed? Wow. No. But it made me think about the ways we view people who disagree with us. I didn't question Israel's right to exist. I didn't mention its Jewish citizens at all. Those weren't the issue. My opinions were inferred, then dismantled, then decimated. I was vilified for demanding action that I would never agree with. So I responded. I opposed settlements, I opposed occupation, I opposed oppression, but of course I didn't believe that anybody should be destroyed or exiled or murdered. Not Jews, not Palestinians. I didn't think telling these stories implied that I did, but I was happy to dispel that notion once and for all. My new friend seemed surprised, and we launched into a better discussion, ironing out our specific views on political issues. Once we agreed not to jump to conclusions and to listen respectfully, we could start talking about the facts. It was ultimately an enriching conversation. But it started off angrily, defensively. It started from misunderstanding. And if she hadn't said anything, both of us would have been none the wiser. Underneath the peace that everyone wants, this issue is rooted deep. It's tied to religion, race, and identity. I learned that at General Assembly, and I'm still learning it today. And as with any such issue, the dialogue, the way we approach talking about it, is so important and so difficult to get right. How do we talk about oppression? How do we acknowledge societal issues that are so inciting? How can we avoid letting personal ties interfere with common ground? How do we affirm the worth and dignity of everyone? Before we left, I saw myself lashing out, getting frustrated, getting confused, not seeing that the big picture isn't about a simple solution. And I've seen that attitude over and over since I've gotten back. But it turns out that simple solutions are in short supply. It's dialogue and debate that brings us something else, that humanizes us. And maybe all we can do is practice talking across the realities. Our contribution to the solution is our ability to see and talk about the world in all of its complexities.